Join the coven. Today's video is brought to you by Audible. Audible is offering my listeners a free audiobook with a 30-day trial membership. Just go to audibletrial.com/GothicRose and browse the unmatched selection of audio programs. Download a title for free and start listening. It's that easy. Just go to audibletrial.com/GothicRose to get started today. When I was 17, I worked in a large mall at Fans. I had a lot of creepy older guys come in and flirt with me. But one guy took the cake. One day, I was working the usual busy as hell Saturday night, and there were 4 very tall men that asked for my help getting shoes. I worked at an outlet, so the store was large with tall racks. The mall I worked in was extremely popular amongst locals and tourists alike. The mall has some history with being a trafficking hotspot for context. So anyway, the men said they were from Nigeria, and they were pretty chill at first, until they began to flirt. One man kept saying he has a son in Nigeria and asked if I wanted to wed him. I laughed because I thought he was joking. But suddenly, he looked extremely offended. I was awkward and began talking about the shoes, but the man interrupted me, saying how great his son was and that I would make a great wife. At that point, I grew uncomfortable because I didn't want to be rude, so I asked for a coworker to come over and take care of them while I went to the bathroom. Everything was normal for the remainder of my shift. I clocked out and I was waiting for my dad to come pick me up. I usually walked around the halls of the mall as I waited. The music was soothing and all was calm. I walked past a restroom hall and saw figures standing in my peripheral. I glanced and saw that it was the 4 men from earlier. I was in full panic mode at that point, but I played it off. I smiled at them softly and kept walking so that they didn't think I was being rude. Sure enough, they began following me. I picked up my pace, hoping to find other people walking around, but there was no one. I was speed walking, but the guys were keeping pace with me. My thoughts were just to go to the bathroom so I could lose them. So I entered the next restroom hall. I walked slowly, thinking I had lost them, but soon after I heard pounding footsteps in a hurry. I looked back and they were coming right for me. I didn't think the bathroom was an option anymore, and I started yelling for help. I ran straight for the employee corridors of the mall. Right when I got through the doors, a security guard met me on the other side. I bumped into him, and I never felt more relieved in my life. The men took off the other way, and the guard let me stay in his office until my dad came. Thank God for the guard. If he wasn't there, I probably wouldn't be writing this right now. As for those guys, let's not meet again. I'm on mobile, so the format might be a little wonky. Just as a reference, I'm a transgender man and use he pronouns. But to make this story easier, I'm going to refer to myself as female. At the time, my name was Samantha. This happened to me when I was 12. So, if I'm 20 now, that would make this about 8 years ago. Every summer, I would spend the time with my grandparents, who lived up in the mountains in a small mountain town. It was one of those remote little towns where everyone knew each other, but it was empty as it was close. We had barely any streetlights at the time, none by my house, that type of thing. My grandparents were a tad irresponsible. They would often leave me at the house alone when they needed to run errands in the city a few hours away. I was a pretty responsible kid, and nothing bad had ever happened. Until one summer evening. One summer evening, I took a glass of iced tea outside so I could sit on the porch and watch the sun go down. I was minding my own business when I heard a voice call out to me. "Hey you, little lady." This voice was sort of thick and raspy, like this person had been chain smoking for 40 years straight. I look up, and there's a man at the end of the driveway. To this day, his image is burned into my mind. He was tall. He towered over me, at about 6'5", if I had to wager a guess. He was wearing a pair of overalls that were caked in grime and dirt, and what I learned later to be animal blood. A white wife-beater that was torn to all hell, muddy black boots, and a somehow completely pristine silver watch. He was an older person, maybe about 50 or 60. His eyes were a sharp blue, his face so wrinkled up it was akin to a walrus. His hair was gray with streaks of blonde. He had a huge, long beard and was mostly balding with long hair to his shoulders, where he wasn't. He was missing most of his teeth. If you're wondering how I got such a good look at him, I'll get to that in a moment. I didn't automatically assume the worst, even if it was odd. I sort of replied with a non-committal, yeah? And he gets a lot closer to me, to where we are about 10 feet apart. "Do you have directions to 1234 Forest Lane?" he asked. That was my address. That's here, this house. Are you looking for my grandparents? They aren't home today." Big mistake. My naive self thought nothing bad of this entire situation. He nodded, and this grin formed on his face. It was positively toothless and genuinely sinister. It was then that it clicked that something wasn't right. "Good. Very good." The man looks around. It occurred to me that none of my neighbors were home. Most were out to dinner or staying late at work. It was a Friday night. My stomach sank. The man looked back at me and seemed to scan me up and down. "You're a very pretty girl," he said simply. "Too pretty to be underage, I reckon." And that made me start to shake. I was frozen in my steps, and here is this man who took a few steps closer, and then he asked me a question that chilled me to my core, and to this day, it haunts me. "Are you afraid to die, Samantha?" He knew my name. I had never seen this man before in my entire life, and he knew my name. That's what scared me the most. I very wisely decided to get the hell out of Dodge, and I ran into the house, slamming the glass screen door and locking it. Side note, our front door is a sliding glass door. It's weird, I know. He stood maybe about 3 feet away from the door. And then we stared at each other. I got a good look at this guy, everything from the toes to the top of his head. Each of us stood there, barely moving, seeming to be in a game of red light, green light. Whoever moved first lost. The sun was setting. It felt like an eternity, but in reality, we were maybe only there for 10 minutes tops. Every 30 seconds, it got just a little darker. And darker. And darker. The man was slowly becoming a silhouette. And then he was starting to disappear. No streetlights, no neighbors, no witnesses. I began to tear up and shake. I was so scared. I didn't think I'd have been more scared in my entire life. Was I going to die here? I was so young. There was so much I wanted to do. If he ran to get in, what next? Would I go back outside and try and make a run for the gas station up the street? Would I try to hide and outlast him until my grandparents arrived? If so, where could I hide? And then, by some grace of God, my grandparents arrived home. The headlights shined on the guy, or at least where he should have been. He was gone. I ran to my grandparents sobbing and telling them what happened. They called the police, but there wasn't much they could do. A few years later, I was at my grandparents' again. I wake up from a good night's sleep and wander into the kitchen, serving myself some breakfast that my grandma had made. I sat at the table next to my grandpa. Wordlessly, he handed me the paper he was reading. Front page, above the fold, there was a mugshot of the man I had encountered. He was a butcher in a remote town a few hours away, being convicted for killing and committing necrophilia on the bodies of his wife and 3 kids, and then butchering them into pieces and throwing them out into the deep woods. He apparently was also under investigation for various murders, all of which involved dismemberment. I have no idea if anyone else saw this guy or knows about the case off the top of their heads, but if you do, it would be really interesting to hear about and maybe read that news article again. I wouldn't be surprised, since this is so sinister in nature. Apparently he killed all women, and if he truly did dismember all those people, I would fit his victim profile. Young, female, dark hair, dark eyes, and of native or Hispanic origin. My grandpa took back the newspaper when I was done reading it, and trying to conceal how shaken he was. He put a hand on my shoulder and said, "I'm so happy you're here, kid." So creepy serial killer, who stood at my glass door staring me down until it went dark, I ask you, very unkindly, let's not meet. 4 years ago, when I was 15, me and my parents moved to a new apartment and we decided to get a puppy. We would walk him 4 or 5 times a day, but we still struggled a lot with my dog's separation anxiety. So I imagine for the first weeks, it must have been hell to my neighbors, because he would bark and cry whenever we left him alone. However, every time we talked to my neighbors, they would just tell us not to worry about it because they hardly heard my dog, and everyone was fine with it. Except for Tony. One Saturday, I was home alone and someone knocked on my door. It was Tony. At first he just looked somewhat surprised to see me open the door, but then he just smiled politely and said, "Can you tell your parents to come see me when they get home, please?" I said yes, and he left. I thought nothing of it. When my parents came home, I told them about my encounter with Tony, and my dad went to his apartment, suspecting it had something to do with my dog barking. Tony told my dad that he was a baker, so he worked during the night and needed to sleep during the day, so he would appreciate if we could find a way to make less noise, although he understood it was hard to control a dog's bark. He also apologized to showing up at our door, saying he did not know I was alone in there. My dad and him had a nice, polite conversation. My father apologized for the inconvenience and came home and we did our best to deal with my puppy's anxiety, and it worked. My dog, of course, still barked, but wasn't so agitated as he used to be. Flash forward a few weeks. Every time my dog sensed Tony going down the stairs of our apartment building, my dog would go nuts. He was a fairly friendly dog towards people, but he absolutely hated this guy, and Tony had stopped talking to us, ignoring us every time we ran into him, or he would simply just stare at us. One day, me and my mother came home, and on our apartment door were 6 holes, like if someone had punched the door with a key or something sharp. My mother, very naive, thought maybe we had done that damage ourselves throughout the months. That's when Martha, one of our other neighbors, calls my mother worried about me, questioning her if I had been home alone during the afternoon. My mom said no. That's when Martha tells us that someone came banging and kicking at her door while screaming a bunch of insults, making a scene so terrifying that her 11-year-old son, on the apartment 2 floors above us, got so scared he hid under his bed for 4 hours until Martha came home, because he thought someone was breaking into our house. A few weeks later, there was a city fair at night, and my parents and I, plus Martha and her family, headed out of the building to go to the fair. We came back earlier, around 11 p.m. At almost 12 a.m., someone rang our doorbell. My dad went to see who it was, but no one responded. Usually when this happens, we either go to the window to try and see who it is, or we go downstairs, because it usually is the mailman. But since it was midnight, my dad found it very strange and didn't go downstairs. He ignored it, and we all went to bed. Well, the next morning, my mother runs into Martha, and she tells my mom that when they came back from the fair, they had found Tony hidden in the dark under the stairs with a freaking baseball bat in his hands. He looked nervous, but said someone had rang his doorbell, and he found it weird that someone would do that so late at night. So he had come downstairs to see who it was with the baseball bat. My mom immediately knew what had happened. He had rang her doorbell expecting my dad to come downstairs to see who it was. I don't know if his plan was to attack my dad, but my father, worrying about me and my mother's safety, since he wasn't home during the week, went upstairs fuming and knocked on Tony's door. When he saw my father, I swear he almost passed out. My father confronted him, and Tony started crying. He said he sometimes did drugs and didn't know what he was doing, apologized for damaging our door with a pocket knife, and for whatever happened the night before. He couldn't even lie. Turns out the reason my dog freaked out when he sensed him and barked so much was because Tony waited until everyone in the building had left for work and went to my door and kicked it, making my dog more furious each time, and not so much because of his anxiety. My dad said very calmly, "This is the last time I will talk to you. Next time you come near or even look in the direction of my family again, I will make sure to make my point clear. Do you understand?" The guy kept crying and trying to hug my dad. We went to the police and filed a report, but we stopped seeing Tony. Turns out his wife kicked him out and filed a restraining order for her and their daughter because one morning she woke up with him staring at her and their daughter sleeping, and the whole house smelt like gas because he had left the stove on. We moved shortly afterwards. I'm a 14-year-old male, and I live in a pretty isolated area. I joined a gym a few months ago, and since it was a walkable distance, I used to walk on my way home to the gym and return in a public transport rickshaw for the Indians in the sub of Vikram. These vehicles are pretty compact and congested, with the set of 2 seating rows in front of each other. My session ended at around 8 in the evening, so it was pretty dark. I got into a rickshaw and told the driver where I needed to be dropped. When the auto started, I realized that this very creepy looking man with dark circles under his red eyes is staring at me with an expressionless face. I shrug it off, since these types of people are fairly common in my area. Few moments go by, and the driver asks where I need to get off, as he has forgotten. I told him again, and this creepy guy says that he will too get off there. I started to get a bit creeped out, but still didn't think much of it. I got off at my spot with the creepy dude, paid the driver, and started walking to the street that led into my neighborhood. I glance behind and see that this guy is following me. The creepiest part is that he was walking in an extremely dead manner. I was getting scared at this point, but felt relieved when I saw that there was a wedding taking place on my way home. It's an Indian wedding, so needless to say, it was very loud and bright. I thought he might go away now, but he didn't. He kept following me. As I passed the marriage lawn, it again became extremely quiet and dark, since the area I live in is very empty and there are no streetlights. The man is still following me. I thought to myself that maybe he lived around here, so there is a chance that he is not following me. But still, I was scared enough to start walking faster. When I was 3 minutes away from my home, I saw that I was no longer being followed, so I assumed he wasn't actually after me. Just when I reached the street my house was on, I saw him running towards me. I was scared like hell, so I started running as fast as I could to my house and started ringing the bell. I looked to my side to see that he was just standing there, like a statue, staring at me. Just as I was about to scream, my sister opened the gate and I got in, locked it and the door. I told her what happened. We both got on the roof of the house to see where he was. We saw him walking away into the darkness. I left for gym early the next day and came back before dark. This was the scariest experience I've ever had, regardless of how anticlimactic it was. This happened almost a year ago, May 2019. I tried keeping it short, but it's still quite long. My post has been removed before, but I believe it fits here. Spoiler: I escaped. I'm a French 20-year-old female and decided to come work in London after I spent some time in England. I was living in a hood of London with my friends last year and came back this year to the same street, different house. Because of my job, I was waking up at 4:30 a.m. and then waiting for the bus until 5 a.m. The bus station was at the end of my street. I just had to cross the road, and there was another further up the main road where I was going sometimes. The week it happened, my bus was late every morning, so I had been waiting at my bus stop for ages, every morning, reading my book. I'm very cautious, so always keeping an eye around apart from drunk people. It's quiet. That day, I decided to go later than usual because I was sure my bus would be late. Going up my street, I noticed 2 black males next to my usual bus stop. They weren't doing anything nor talking or anything, and something didn't feel right. For some reason, maybe because my brain noticed many things were wrong, the gloves, the hood, the situation, I decided to go to the other bus stop further up. So instead of crossing the road, I turned left immediately, seeing that they crossed the street. It happens that guys offer drugs to buy so naively, and because I tend to freak out too much, I stay calm. even though my guts were screaming I should run. I heard the footsteps of the first male getting closer, almost like he was running, and he shouted something at me. I didn't get what he said, so I turned around, hoping I would just decline his drug offer. Pretty sure I smiled. He said something like, "You a foreigner?" Heavy London accent, and managed to push me in the corner of the following street while saying that. I was peeing my pants at this point. After I said yes, he said, "Listen, I've got a gun on me," to which I genuinely answered, "Why would you have a gun on you?" in a high-pitched tone, which I now think was funny. "Give me your money." "I don't have any." I thought maybe he'll take me to the ATM and I'll lose a few hundreds. Could be worse. But no, instead he grabbed me with his friend next to me and started pushing me down the street next to my own street, whilst saying all kinds of, "If you scream, I'll kill you. Are you scared?" Of course I'm scared, almost peeing my pants, and I was thinking, Jesus, you know this isn't going anywhere good. You've seen plenty of movies. Do something. But my body wasn't responding. Another man was going down the street. I looked at him like, please, freaking do something. This can't look normal. But he looked confused and went his way. Halfway up the street, still holding me, he said to his friend, "Open the door." I started looking around frantically, like, is it a car, a house? His friend turned to a house with a key in his hand. And that's where I just lost it. I just went, nope. Literally, I said, nope. Now in front of the English houses, there's those small walls. So I just grabbed it like my life depended on it. The man still holding me. I started shouting in French and English, suddenly fluent, and screaming at the top of my lungs. His friend looked confused and not sure of what he was doing. I thought, that's my chance. The male holding me kept on saying, "I got a gun. Do you want to die? Shut up. I'll kill you." And I was screaming, "There's no way I'm passing that door. I've seen enough movies. What is wrong with you? I just want to go to my job. I have a family." I was shouting at the other one, "Close the door." And he was, which was unreal. The guy was trying to make me let go of the wall and shouting to his friend to help him. He wasn't. Thank God for that. Yet he managed to pull me through the gates. With all fours flying in the air, I grabbed it and teared it down. The whole wall falling apart with it. Then I managed to grab the other side of the wall, the one next to the neighbor's house. I was like 2 meters from the door, my bag and my book on the floor. One of the stones was coming off the wall, and I was thinking, should I try to hit him, make a run for it? But I didn't see myself doing parkour all of a sudden. That's when the lady next door opened. I screamed, "Call the cops, I'm not going through that door." And the male holding me was like, "You know what you did." To that I replied, still in my high-pitched voice, "The hell you mean? I haven't done anything." While the other one was like, "I haven't done anything." The lady was looking very confused. She didn't reach out to help me. Said some confusing stuff. How she had called the cops because someone broke in her garden last night. Then I blinked, and she was gone. He was holding my throat, saying, "Do you want to die? You're a hostage now." And there, I felt his heart on my back pounding real fast. And I thought to myself, thank God he's panicking. I said I didn't want to see the cops either. That I just wanted to go to my job and read my book. Still holding me tight, he was trying to get me to come at the end of the street. I said I'd rather die than move. I thought it was a shame to die like this, but better than being kidnapped a few houses from mine. After what felt like forever of him asking me to let go and come at the end of the street to die. And me saying I wouldn't move, he blurted out, "I just want to screw you." I said, "Hell no." I talked about how traumatizing that was, but of course he said he didn't care. Then out of nowhere, after asking me what my job was, he told me to get my book. I said, "No, you close the door first, and you give me my book." Which he did. Again, surrealistic. Then my bag. Same. Then he let go of me and said, "Run." I looked at them both. Are you sure? Scared they would beat me up and shove me inside. I didn't run. I crossed the street, facing them all along, and went to the bus stop up the street. Shocking how there was so many people few meters from all this and didn't hear me scream. I couldn't stop crying. Waiting for my bus, I called my mom and dad. Went to work. My boss told me to go to the police after my shift, which I did. I later learned there was 20 people in that house. Makes me want to throw up when I think of the what if. I later found out that lady neighbor never called the police, but things could have been worse if she hadn't made her apparitions, so thanks, I guess. Since that day, I never went back to my room, just once with my uncle to pick up my stuff, and we drove past the house where the part of the wall I was holding onto was missing. Anyway, I'm alive and safe, far away in France, and I still think about this day a lot. Going to the gym more than ever. I started my first job at Tim Hortons when I was 16 and worked there for many years throughout high school and university. I could probably add about 10 stories here about inappropriate regulars, but this is one that still really haunts me. I was about 17 or 18 at the time and worked at a location that was 10 minutes down the street from my parents' home. A neighbor, Alex, lived roughly 8 houses down and started coming in regularly for coffee and small talk with me. Alex was at least 45 to 50, and it turns out he used to work with my dad and has lived in my neighborhood for years. Nothing about our conversation seemed weird or alarming to me. After a few months of completely normal interactions, he found me on Facebook. I accepted because I was young and had no social media boundaries at the time. This is when things started to get weird. He would DM me about things I was posting instead of commenting publicly. He would offer me rides to work or class and would make comments about my hair, makeup, and curves. I found out that he was married and has a son a few years younger than me. I started ignoring his messages and eventually removed him as a friend. When he came in for his coffees after this, he would ask for my number, wouldn't take no for an answer, and just generally made me uncomfortable. I started asking coworkers to serve him. My manager at the time refused to ban him from the store. I also learned that he used to send a past employee flowers and do the same things to her. Fast forward a few months, Alex seemed to have gotten the hint and stopped asking for me when he came into my workplace. One evening, I was walking my dog around my subdivision and smoking some weed, as I did most nights before bed. I walked the same route each night, which unfortunately meant I had to pass by his house. On my way back this night, I saw him out of the corner of my eye coming out of his house with a baseball bat. He stood in his front yard for a minute, and then I could hear him starting to walk behind me, and I panicked. I was also high and unsure if I should be as alarmed. Was this a time to panic? Some kids in the duplex across the street started banging on the window and making a bunch of noise. I was too scared to even look up at them. My dog started getting agitated, and I decided to start running since I was only 2 minutes from home. I figured I can make it inside and lock the door. Alex must have been spooked by the noise and stopped following me. I am very thankful for those kids who knew that situation did not look right and tried to warn me. It worries me to think about what would have happened if they didn't. Alex, let's not meet ever. So this happened to me almost 7 years ago now. I should give some background info before getting into things. At the time this all happened, when I was around 16 years old, and I had a friend I'll call Karen, who was dating a boy named John. At this point in time, Karen and John had been dating for maybe 6 months, and after going out with Karen and John on many occasions, they decided that they wanted to hook me up with John's friend. We'll call him Cameron. At this point in time, I had met Cameron in person once. He was nice, so I gave him my social media, and we had chatted a couple times. It's important to note he didn't have my number or know where I live. Now it's time for the story. Fast forward to one night, maybe a week or two after I met Cameron. I'm laying in bed. It's about 2 or 3 in the morning, and I get a call from an unknown number. Thinking, why the hell is an unknown calling me at this time of night? I decide to answer it and see who it is. So I answer the phone and say hi, and a man responds saying hi back. Since I didn't recognize the voice on the other end, I ask the person who they are. Instead of giving me an answer to this question, the man on the line tells me to look outside my window. Thinking this is probably a prank call, I tell the man to F off and hang up the phone. Once I did this, the number calls back again. Didn't answer it. The person then proceeds to call me another 4 times until I finally answer the phone, which again I ask, who the heck is calling? This time the person responds and tells me that one of my friends gave him my number and that I'm the guy he's been talking to. At this point, my stupid 16-year-old mind is trying to rationalize this, and the only person I can think of is Cameron. Before I can say anything to this person, he again tells me to look out my window. He's outside, and I begin hearing noises outside my window. Now, I should mention that my room is right beside my parents' room. And being stupid, my first thought was that this fool was going to wake them up, and I'd never hear the end of it. Let me tell you, that thought soon turned into the last thing I would worry about that night. Anyway, at this point, I'm starting to get creeped out. I'm thinking to myself, okay, if this is Cameron, and Karen did give him my number, how the hell would he know where I live? So I reply to the man and say, Cameron? The man says yes and tells me to look out my window. I reply telling him to go home and hang up the phone again. Weirded out, I decide I'm going to get up and go into my basement and call Karen, so that hopefully my parents don't hear me talking from my room. This is really important, because to get to my basement, I have to pass a door that is partially made of glass. So I get downstairs and call Karen. She answers, clearly half asleep. I tell Karen about the unknown call, which I'm assuming is from Cameron, and how he is telling me to look out my window because he's outside, and on top of this, that I can hear someone out there. Karen, now clearly awake, tells me she has never given Cameron my number or address, and calls John quickly from her home phone to see if maybe he did. At this point, John answers and tells Karen that Not only had he never given my information out, he is with Cameron. They tell me if someone's outside, I need to hang up and call the police immediately. So I hang the phone up, and before I can even go to dial for anyone, I get another call. Guess who? Unknown number. So I stupidly answer again, and before I get a word in, the man tells me that he knows I'm in my basement. He saw me walking by my back door. Now I'm clearly disturbed, as I did just walk by my back door to get downstairs, so I know someone is outside. Again, before I could say anything, the man tells me to come outside. So stupidly, I tell the person I'm calling the police and hang up the phone. Why I didn't call the police at this point, I really don't know. Probably because I was 16, stupid, and literally in panic mode. Not more than a minute later, I get another call. Unknown number. I answer again. The man then tells me to come outside or he's coming inside to get me. Clearly panicking at this point, I have this deep gut feeling that if I go outside, I'm never coming back. However, I do have to go by the door again to get back upstairs. And that was equally terrifying to me. So I hang up the phone again and muster up the courage to run upstairs because the last place I wanted to be was in a part of the house no one else was in. I get more calls. Unknown number, unknown number, unknown number. Again, my 16-year-old stupidity answers. This time the voice on the phone sounds shook and says to me that police stopped him outside my house and want to speak to me to make sure I know him. The phone that gets passed off to someone who identifies themselves by name with some title I no longer remember and asks if I know the man outside, my address. He says my house number and street. I quickly tell the voice on the phone I don't have any idea who the person calling me is and hang up the phone. Never got another call again. However, I did sit there all night holding a bat and had problems sleeping for months. I should also mention I didn't have many friends at this point in my life, and looking back on this night, I thought maybe this was a prank taken too far. However, I begged the few friends I did have for months to admit that one of them was the person who pulled this off, and to this day, they all insist none of them did this. So whatever got this person to stop calling me, thank God. And to the unknown caller, let's not meet. This happened around 10 years ago in the south of the UK. For reference, I'm a 28-year-old male, and at the time I was working part-time at a fuel station on a road which linked a small village to a ring road into the nearby city. The village itself was quiet, high-end, and extremely expensive to live in. It was the sort of place that only had one chain store, and it was a Waitrose. Everything else was either boutiques or privately owned gourmet grocers, so as someone who has enjoyed cars, it was always fun to see what kind of high-end luxury sports cars would adorn the forecourt on any given day. That is where I met Michael. Michael was in his late 40s, dark hair, well-dressed, always wore Gant or Ralph Lauren, or on his work days tailored Canali suits, etc. He was an all-around nice guy, exceptionally polite, which was actually a rarity as most of the residents of the surrounding areas seemed to despise anyone who didn't qualify for the additional tax bracket. We got chatting about his collection of vehicles, or the watches he wore. He'd always show up wearing some kind of Rolex and driving his Aston Martin, Range Rover, or Porsche. So there was always a lot to talk about. I got to know that he worked in finance, and the conversation got into what I was planning to do with my life, also to work in finance. And we'd always have these pleasant conversations until I left that part-time job in favor of taking up an apprenticeship role at my uncle's brokerage. Michael's important, and we'll get to why shortly. Something to be known about my uncle is that he's a man with a lot of fingers and a lot of pies. Literally. As well as his brokerage and property portfolio, he also owned a few takeaways for cash flow purposes. I think we all know what that means, and as such, I'd occasionally step in as a delivery driver when a driver would let him down. Luckily, my uncle also lived in the previously mentioned village, and the main pizza place he owned catered to the residents of said village. So the tips were usually quite decent, and my uncle would usually throw me a few quid for helping out. Fast forward to summer 2008, and I've been roped into dropping off a few pies at a property on the extremely prestigious road. Average house price well above 1.4 million, and I'm intrigued to actually get close enough to see what these houses actually look like, as they're all gated and set far back from the road, behind a shroud of trees and shrubs. So I find the place and buzz the intercom when a voice comes back, sort of muffled, just saying, "Yes?" So I answer with the name of the takeaway, and the gates slowly open, and I make my way up the driveway to a very large mock Georgian home, complete with detached 4-car garage, and that's when I see Michael's number plates. He had his initials for his cars, with the numbers 1, 2, and 3, and it was the same for his wife. I was interested to see up close the sort of life this guy had, if I'm completely honest, especially as a young, aspiring financier. I exited my car, brought out the pizzas, and the double doors opened, and that's when I saw an unfamiliar face looking back at me. It was a man, early 20s maybe, thin and shaved head. I can remember he was wearing no shirt and some scruffy jeans and trainers. He was also holding something behind his back. "Hey, bring the pizzas through to the kitchen." I can remember his voice being hoarse and barely audible, and with an accent I had never heard before. Nervously I said nothing and just looked at him, which made him visibly angry. "Bring the pizza through," he repeated, more aggressive this time, and I finally responded. "Where's Michael? This is Michael's place, right?" And it is completely true that in situations like this, your mouth goes completely dry, and to always follow your gut. This guy was setting off alarm bells and telling every fiber of my being to just get off the property. Unfortunately, this is when it dawned upon me that it's a gated property, and I was locked in. This is when things went from bad to worse. I can remember the terror swelling up inside of me when he moved his hand in front of him to show me a large kitchen knife and uttered the words, "Run." I dropped the pizza onto the gravel, left my car, and decided I'd have a better chance of survival by running down the driveway and lifting myself over the gates. They were the wooden type, which had no decorative spears atop of them, luckily. But all the while I could hear his feet crunching onto the gravel behind me. I didn't look back and managed to pull myself up over the gates and hurling myself onto the pavement beneath me. The adrenaline in my system still had me running for what seemed like hours, but this was perhaps 10 minutes at most until I was a good few streets away, and I decided to call the police. Police met me at the park I was hiding at. One officer stayed with me and the other proceeded to the property along with another patrol car. At first I got the distinct impression that they didn't believe me or thought I was up to something. But after my uncle arrived to pick me up and vouch for me being sent there to deliver pizza, the PC in question backed down. Upon their arrival at the property, they found nothing, just my car with slashed tires and broken windows alongside feces being smeared across part of the kitchen. There was food strewn about the place, and also a needle found in one of the bathrooms, but no sign of the man who threatened me. Michael and his family at the time were visiting family in Australia. I later found out. I never did go back for another shift at the pizza place, and though I understand this may not be the most crazy or horrifying encounter on the subreddit, it's something that always stuck with me. Wealth and apparent financial security is just completely illusionary. People are people, and there are some sick and tormented people out there who will always find a way to carry out their twisted actions. And if anything, I've had more encounters with crazy people since moving away from my council estate roots and into suburbia. When I was in my early 20s, I had just moved to New York City to pursue my career as a dancer. I was young, naive, and was one of those people that was always polite, even when my boundaries were crossed. I lived in Brooklyn at the time, and I'd gone into the city alone to meet up with some friends of mine for lunch. We spent the day together, and later that evening, I made my way back home before the partygoers started going out. As I'm waiting for the train, which is, of course, delayed, this man, probably in his late 40s, early 50s, walks up to me and asks me for the time. I tell him and then go back to waiting. Again, this man is now standing next to me, starts trying to make small talk. I'm not really interested. I was tired, kind of hungry, and just exhausted from spending the day with people. Can you tell I'm an introvert? Eventually the train comes and I rush on. Of course it's full, but there's a seat that's opened up and I sit down. The man gets on after me, and as I sit down, he stands directly in front of me, pretty much blocking me in. At this point, I started feeling like something is quite off with this guy. He continues to talk to me while looking down on me. I'm trying to give off the I don't want to talk to you vibe, but not actually saying it. Remember that I'm a young girl who was raised to always be polite and smile. Eventually, as we slowly make our way back into Brooklyn, a seat opens up and he takes this as a cue to sit down next to me. He starts asking all kinds of open-ended questions about myself. Not wanting to be rude, I give him short but vague and to-the-point answers. Suddenly, the train stops due to a delay. I die a little inside because that means I'm stuck here next to this absolute creepy weirdo who won't take a hint. I don't want to talk to him. He continues talking to me about what I couldn't tell you. I was in my own head trying to plan my escape and thinking of all the worst case scenarios. I was alone on my way home in a city of millions of people. I'd end up another statistic of a missing person and no one would ever know what happened to me. The man starts talking about dance and starts making references to things he either knew nothing about or knew about, but was intentionally getting them wrong so I'd say more than a few words to him. It worked, if that was his plan. I was annoyed with the man by this point and just wanted to be left alone. But I felt like I had just had to correct him, which was really dumb, because now he seemed to think I was really engaged in conversation with him. After a train ride that felt like an eternity started to come to an end, my stop came up. I waited until the last possible second before getting up and practically running off the train. The man was obviously taken by surprise, but somehow managed to run off after me, saying something about how this was his stop too. I literally ran up the stairs and he ran after me, skipping a step at a time, trying to keep up with me. As soon as we got above ground, he said something about how closely he lived and was going to make a run to the grocery store real quick. It was at the stop I had just gotten off at, as if he expected me to wait for him or something. I ran as fast as I possibly could until I got into my building. After that night, any time I'd come out of my building, I'd have a small panic attack because I'd be expecting this guy to be lurking around some corner waiting for me. Thankfully, after that encounter, I never saw him again. A few years ago, I was renting a house in Northern California. The neighborhood was just outside the suburbs. It seemed like the perfect balance of having space and having nice neighbors close enough not to feel isolated. The area had no streetlights, so it was very dark at night, especially if there were clouds blocking the moonlight. It didn't bother me though. It made my little house feel even more quaint on dark nights. I got home from work one day in midwinter. It was a cloudy night, so pulling up to my house, I saw only what my headlights and front porch light illuminated. When I got out of my car, I caught a whiff of cigarette smoke. That was odd, as I had never smelt that before around that house. I couldn't see anyone nearby, so I ignored it and went inside. I had just got off a shift with a few hours of overtime, so I felt pretty tired. Even though it wasn't even 7 yet, I decided to take a shower and call it a night. I woke up sometime later, sure that I heard a noise inside my house. I wasn't worried right away, because my friend would sometimes stop by to use my shower after work, on his way to his night classes. I even gave him a spare key, so he could stop by even when I wasn't home. He would always text me to let me know beforehand though, and I hadn't heard my phone go off. I reached over to my bedside table and picked up my cell phone to see if my friend had sent me a text. The bright light from my phone's screen and number pad blinded me. These were the days before phones had a light sensor that would dim the screen in the dark, and this particular phone was so bright I could use it as a flashlight. Through squinted eyes, I could make out that it was 9-something, but I couldn't tell if I had an unread text or not. I set my phone aside and called out my friend's name. There were a couple of seconds of silence before I heard loud footfalls as someone started running through the bottom floor of my house. I leapt out of bed and ran to the closet. They were already up the stairs by the time I had opened the door and stepped inside. That house had 3 rooms upstairs, 2 bedrooms on either side of the hallway, the one I was in and a spare, and a bathroom at the end. The bedroom doors were both closed, but the bathroom door was cracked open. I heard whoever was in my house thunder down the hallway past my door and into the bathroom. Thank God he did. That gave me enough time to open the attic access in the ceiling of my closet and hoist myself up. I had just started to lift myself up when the person ran back out of the bathroom. My feet were barely inside the attic when my bedroom door burst open. I heard footsteps run into my room and stop. When they didn't see me in that room, they ran back to the hallway and into the other room, which just had boxes stacked in a corner, some weights, and a table where I painted my miniature models. I guess they decided that if someone were hiding, it would be in the bedroom, because they charged back into my room and turned on the light. A moment later, the closet door was ripped open. I was crouched in my attic, just a foot or so away from the access, so I could try to stop them if they started to climb up. From my vantage point, all I could see was from about their knee down. They were wearing dirty blue jeans with frayed cuffs and worn work boots. After a few seconds of looking in the closet, they stepped away, and I heard a loud crash come from my room, followed by a scream of frustration and anger. That scream was the most unnerving part of the incident for me. It reminded me far too much of my stepfather, who would scream in a similar way when he lost his temper. He would eventually be put in a mental hospital for several mental disorders that resulted in erratic and violent tendencies. The man in my house ran back downstairs. I heard crashes and clatters as things were thrown around and furniture was knocked over. I stayed crouched in the attic. I had left my cell phone when I ran for the closet, and I wasn't certain I could climb down without him hearing. After some time, the noises stopped. I started counting slowly. When I reached 1,000, I decided it was safe enough to climb down and call the police. The first thing I noticed when I exited the closet was the intruder had flipped my bed over. I assumed in an attempt to find me. That was the loud noise I had heard after he stepped away from the closet. I couldn't find my cell phone, so I went to the landline by the bed and called the police. I waited in my room until I heard them call out from downstairs. The first floor was a mess, but I expected that. Chairs had been knocked over, the sofa had been flipped, all the books, pictures, and knickknacks I had on my shelves were strewn across the floor. The cupboards in the kitchen had been opened, and all the boxed and canned foods had been thrown to the ground. As far as I could tell, though, the only missing thing was a single knife out of the wooden block in my kitchen. The police checked the house from top to bottom. They found that the side door had been forced open by something like a crowbar. They also found a few cigarette butts along my fence line, along with some foil and an empty pen tube, which the police said people often used to smoke meth. So they think he had been watching my house for a while. I realized that he must have been out there smoking a cigarette when I got home. They collected up the evidence and told me I should stay with family or friends that night and get that door fixed as soon as possible. I opted to just not sleep. I moved a shelf over to block the broken door and spent the next couple hours cleaning things up. I would often go to the window with a flashlight and shine it along the fence line where the police found the cigarette butts and foil, but I didn't see anything. The next day, I called to have the door fixed and motion lights installed at the back and sides of my house. I ran a phone cable up into the attic and added a landline. I never wanted to be stuck up there without a phone again. Nothing else happened at that house, though. I lived there another 3 years without incident. One more precaution I took was practicing getting out of my bed, going to my closet, and climbing into the attic as quickly and quietly as possible. I even kept at it when I moved, except now I go to a crawl space at the back of the closet instead of the attic. I try not to think about what would have happened if I had been a bit slower getting to the attic, or if he hadn't gone into the bathroom at the end of the hall first.